Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Geeking Out podcast. I am the Athletic Geek, and we're doing a little something different with the podcast this week. AEW has just gone into its third year of existence, or at least its third year of running shows, with Double or Nothing being this past weekend. And it was suggested by Nick, who in our group chat, to kind of give a sort of state of the union address as far as like where we feel, how we feel the company is, come along, how we feel it's changed, what we like, what we don't like. Kind of just look back at everything that has happened, that seems to be happening with the company that we talk about the most on our normal live streams, and just kind of have a general idea of how we feel about the company because there's so much going on. There's so many layers that we're all over the place on our normal recap live streams, and this is kind of like a good chance to really get a lot of it out. So it is all of the marks this week. It is myself, the Athletic Geek. It is EZ.
Yo, yo.
It is CJ,
Yo.
and it is Nick.
Hi.
Hi. Got to be different there. Um, so to start this off, we're gonna go with easy first. How do you like? Tell us how you feel about how AEW's, the journey and how it's changed, and then also what are the things that you enjoy about the company, and what are things that you would like to change or don't really
All
enjoy
right.
about the company.
Yeah. Okay, so just before I talk about it, I'm just going to put aside that everybody went through complete shit during 2020, during the pandemic. So putting that aside, everyone got affected by that. But there were still some things that they were able to work on come 2021. And as of this year, 2022, there are some hits and there are some big misses. So, and I'm going to be, very critical. I may be like the biggest AEW, fanboy on this one, but, I do have some standards that I set on when I want to invest into watching a product here or consuming it either way. So anyway, so the three pros and the three cons I got. So we'll start with the pros. I
Well, how do you feel about like the journey of the company then?
got obviously okay. Oh yeah. So the journey wise, I've just never felt like way more excited about pro wrestling than I did when I got into WWE the second time around when I was actually just able to actually watch it and not have my parents, tell me to turn off the TV or change the channel because it's too violent or it's scripted. It's like, okay, yeah, and but
Mm-hmm.
anyways, so I just like that
Nope.
touch up on the part on the pros here, but the growth wise with AEW, I've been very happy with it. People are, paying attention to the pro wrestling aspect of a show because, another company would say, we're only sports entertainment. We just happen to have a wrestling show on it. It's like, okay, but it's still, they make it fun. The growth of what they've done, on the pro wrestling aspect is they make the shows fun. So this is definitely, if AEW, they're ever in your hometown and whatnot, just watch it. And if this is going to be your first show or your 10th show, it is the experience is always amazing. I've not had a negative AEW experience. Although I went to Full Gear and honestly, just the venue wise, I hated that place. That was the worst place I went to.
Yeah.
Although, and I've gone to AEW Cleveland, which honestly that was a great show as well in 2020. Going to Revolution before the world completely blew up. That's still like my favorite AEW show, and then AEW Chicago with the first MJF Punk show. From each of those experiences that I've had, I've kind of been seeing, the growth that AEW has been bringing towards with the community, and just the popularity wise.
Um,
So
Going to your three
overall,
things, I know you kind
I'm
of
I'm
mentioned
just very happy with the. Yep.
you kind of mentioned one, but like, what are your other like positive things?
Okay, so yeah, with the three positives that I had here was like, yeah, the pro wrestling aspect, and actually, I did kind of touch up with the community growth, and also just to touch up the venue growth as well. Just not going from like small college arenas. They're still kind of doing it ish, but we're finally getting shows. We're as of this recording, we finally have AEW going to the Forum, and we just had them at Double or Nothing at the T-Mobile Arena, which like that's amazing. Those are the venues we need to go to. The pro hockey, pro basketball venues. So our first AEW show was in Washington D.C. at the Capital One Arena. Something that often WWE sells out the big arena shows. Well, that's something I'm really hoping AEW is going to finally go towards. They're going to get more, I guess, partnerships they can have with the venues if certain somebodies don't try to screw that one up. And, AEW also going to the United Center finally. I'm excited to experience that one day. Sadly, as of right now, I'm not going to the first cross promotion show. But, anyways, and hopefully, with the pay per views coming around, I really do want them to do an outdoor show. We can accomplish that. Hopefully, if the positivity and the money out there and the finances are out there. So just please, I don't want to go to Jacksonville, though. I know they own the Jaguars, but no, I don't care about the damn football team. But anyways, and then my third positive to end this off would be the cross promotion that they've had with Impact, and then the eventual buyout of Ring of Honor, which hopefully that will, draw something. And hopefully maybe, they could go back and forth with the superstars, because I know they have a bit of an overpopulated, a set of rosters. So it's like, okay, X amount of you can go work at Ring of Honor, and especially if they finally get the TV deal sorted out at one point, and then finally getting a cross promotion with New Japan, which is huge. So hopefully, they can still get their superstars, just to branch out to all the other indie companies. It isn't them saying, hey, your favorite guy on this small town place, they're going to come work for AEW one day. It's like, no, actually, it's rather our superstars are going to your place. We're not only promoting what we're doing, but the superstar itself as well. And especially with my experience, meeting Max Caster of the Acclaimed, like that was an awesome experience to have, because he wasn't out there saying, hey, AEW is way better. It's saying, no, I am here because I love pro wrestling. So those are my three positives. Did you want me to go to my three cons?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, now time to get critical. So the first one is, there's always one with no matter what community or whatever following you have, but honestly, I am sick and tired of the goddamn toxic fan community that we do have. I just, that's, at first, it's fun. It was kind of fun at first, Team AEW, Team WWE, whatever. But there gets a point when it gets so fucking toxic, because, oh, we're doing something amazing right here, but the moment we do one screw up, oh, hey, look at all these WWE stands saying, like, haha, you guys, like, messed this one up, this one WWE King. I'm out there thinking, I don't give a fuck what they're doing on Mondays and Fridays. I'm caring about what's going on Wednesdays. So it goes for back and forth with WWE and AEW. Fucking toxic. It's like, I don't give a shit anymore. You do what you want. Let us do what you want. Stop freaking, saying, we're living rent free in your heads, when frankly, it was you guys that brought up the conversation in the first place. So, anyways, I know we ramble about that every week on Just Us Marks, but that's just one. The second one, and I'm pretty sure CJ actually might agree with me on this one, the women's division. It fucking sucks. I'm just going to admit it. It has gone kind of downhill a little bit. Apart from Britt Baker honestly being a badass champion, the women's division needs some fucking help here. Like, it isn't so much that, we're not doing enough on it. It's just, as you know, we're not really doing enough about it. Right now, we have Thunder Rosa and Jade Cargill. Again, as of right now, they're the champions. And they're amazing as hell. But the problem is, we're just not giving a good enough exposure on the women's division. And gee, that reminds me of another company that kind of had a bit of a diva problem themselves. And that's my worry with AEW, is we might fall under that path if we're not getting or doing enough exposure for the women's division here. We have some goddamn great talent out there that we gotta let them lose.
Right.
exposure that we always do. We have with the tag team champs, the TNT champion, the AEW World Champion. Like, come on, how about we? I mean, we have done it in the past before. We had women main events, but maybe get more frequent about it. Because often, whenever we do have a champion, it's not that I don't care. It's that I'm not really fully invested. Like, take for instance, like our first women's champ we had was Riho. Now, look, Riho, but AEW didn't give me a reason to care. Sadly, it wasn't until Nyla Rose became champion. Like I mostly just cared about that because I freaking love Nyla Rose. I met her at C2E2. She's like one of the most badass queens out there. So, and then Hikaru Shida being women's champ, she was great as well. But again, just I don't think AEW was really giving me a reason to care. But then again, this was at the time, the pandemic. We couldn't see these guys in person. They were just doing their Jacksonville shows, and WWE was doing their Thunderdome shows. So, yeah, obviously the experience was not that great and all. But still, it just never really gave me a reason to care. The only saving grace was honestly, and God forbid, you could go back to our past recordings of me just moaning and groaning about Britt Baker's champ. But, there was a good reason for it because she made us hate her. She was, hey, she was a villain. What else can you really say? She wasn't really an anti-hero or a hero. No, she wanted you to hate her. So that's why I was annoyed with Baker as champ because, well, that's how she did it for me. And then as of right now, with Thunder Rosa as champ, Thunder's awesome. I've known her, like, going back when she was part of NWA. Again, it just kind of reverts back to give us a great reason to care. And even having the TBS champion, that's so saving grace and all. But again, give us much better exposure for these amazing women. So thankfully, hopefully with Dynamite, Rampage, Elevation, and hopefully in potential Ring of Honor shows, they'll hopefully grow with it. So again, but if
what's number
you don't
3?
have,
What would your third be?
yeah, okay. Now my third one is, it was fun at first. Now I'm kind of getting a little tired of it now. Every fucking time they try to do like a little bit of a callback to the other company, WWE, like we are the best wrestling show. It's like, okay, we know, but it goes back to the toxic fan community calling us rent free. It's like at times I kind of have to agree with them. I don't give a fuck about the WWE callbacks anymore. I just don't. It's like anytime if Coca-Cola does an advertisement bashing on Pepsi, yeah, it's fun at first, but then it kind of gets tiring the 100th time around. So, or like Burger King, telling us, why we're better than McDonald's. It's like, how about you just focus on your own fucking product here? I don't care about what the other companies are doing. You're telling me about what the other companies are doing. Yeah, I'm kind of going to go see what the other company is doing. I mean, Tony Schiavone knows a hell of a lot about that subject at one time, talking about butts in the seats and all that. Just nobody cares anymore.
Okay.
Focus on your product. So overall, my grade for
No.
the
We'll save that for
company,
the end.
like as of right now,
We'll save that for the
saving
end.
that for the end. Okay,
Yep.
never mind.
Yep.
All
We'll
right,
save that for the end.
all right. I've said my
Because
piece, so that's what I got.
all right. CJ, what about you?
So, 3 years ago, when the T-shirt company decided to start doing pay-per-views and television shows, like a lot of the internet, I was incredibly excited, and I will give them credit. They kept me excited for a really long time, and it was a high that I hadn't really experienced in the wrestling community since I was probably pretty young and a little bit more of a mark. And that kind of brought me back. I always watched. I watched even when I hated it. When I was disappointed in WWE or any other promotions that I ventured into, it was new and it was fun and it was exciting, and I don't mean to say that because like, oh well, now it's not. But to me, the shine has kind of worn off. The rose is a little wilted. We in my line of work, we talk about like this kind of growth where it's like, okay, well, you have to grow your company and you have to grow your business, but you have to grow it in a way that you don't give yourself stretch marks for a visual term. And I think sometimes when watching this, I think that sometimes they get some stretch marks. I think sometimes that they grow a little bit too fast, or they think they've grown into this spot and they kind of get knocked back, and I feel really bad, but I have to point it out. So I will start with my good things, because AEW is still a good company in my opinion. They still have a chance. They haven't lost me. They haven't lost my faith. And so I'll start with my first point in letting it play out. We as a wrestling community hear that all the time. Let it play out. Let the storyline play out. Let this whole thing play out, and see, it'll be fine in the end. And for 3 years, AEW has rebuilt that trust that we all have, because honestly, if you watch the mainstream products, WWE, you kind of got burned on the let it play out. And to AEW's credit, 98% of the time, let it play out actually works out. And you're like, oh, okay, I'm not sure about this from the start, but I'm glad I let it play out, because that turned out pretty good. I'm happy. I'm a fan. The CM Punk and MJF at the beginning, we weren't super sold, like, okay, like, you didn't hit all the points and that was a little clunky in the first time, but we let it play out, and it has probably been one of the best storylines they've done in the first 3 years. So to AEW's credit, let it play out is still a thing. They have our trust. I'm going to agree with EZ on one good point, and that's the talent going in and going out. They bring in talent from other promotions. They seem to work well with other promotions for the most part. We see TNA people before the ROH signing happened. We saw ROH people. We see indie guys. If you go to local shows or watch Dark or Dark Elevation, you see the local indie guys get some exposure. Sometimes, usually it's quick matches and they typically don't win, but that's brought in a lot of other people for AEW. Eddie Kingston was a one-time deal during the pandemic, and see how that played out for him. That worked really well. And Ricky Starks was the same, and that's worked out really well for both of them. We also have really good going out talent. So, we just had Eddie Kingston at our local St. Louis promotion, and it was fantastic. And he will be back. And we've had plenty of AEW guys come through and actually wrestle. They do signings. They can still work their own independent dates. And I think that makes, for one, it shines a spotlight on indie wrestling, which I'm all about. But for two, it helps everybody. Everybody wins when the whole wrestling community can build up. You bring everybody up with you. And that's a great quality for an independent contractor to actually work independent dates. It's fantastic. My third good point for AEW is that 99% of the time they acknowledge past. And it's not just their past, it's the character's past. They recognize what Bryan Danielson did, 6 years ago, 5 years ago in the company that we don't really talk about, and what he did in ROH and what he did here and there, and the reference back to, I don't like Eddie Kingston, and now they get into a fight. If you haven't seen the pay-per-view, I'm really sorry about that right now. But I mean, they reference it. It's not like, 2 weeks ago they were enemies, but now they're friends. They do have an example of that, and go back to watch the Just Us Marks recap show for when I point that out. So they don't hit it every single time, but for the most part they do. And I appreciate that, because I don't typically forget little things like that, and it annoys me, and it takes me out of my illusion when you insult my intelligence like that. So I appreciate AEW for doing that. And that's a good mark on them. With the good comes the bad. And so my 3 more negative comments to AEW, my constructive criticism to AEW, are: the first one, the thing that drives me absolutely insane. signings are not the only way to get a buzz about your company. It's not the only way you to get a boost in ratings. You have enough talent where people who could be your main event top tier guys are relegated to YouTube shows or 1 or 2 appearances a quarter. That's 3 months on your television. And to me, that's just not right. That's a bloated roster. And it seems like guys will get signed and they'll get a big, ooh, look who's here, I'm so excited. And then in 2 weeks, it's like, oh yeah, he did sign with them. I forgot about that. I guess Tony Khan did too. It's like ADD with talent contracts. Like, okay, well, the buzz wore off of Keith Lee, so who are we going to sign next to get the buzz going because our numbers dipped again? We'll sign John Morrison. Cool. Like let's find other ways. We're too bloated now. This is not going to work much longer. You're the boy who cried wolf. Let's stop and move on. My second one, I will also agree with Easy. He was right. The women's division and their booking. Now, I just said stop signing talent. In the women's division, I think that you can still stand a few more signings if it's quality talent. Paige Van Zant is a good pickup. She will be a great addition someday, but right now she's not what we need. We need people who can talk. We need people who can work. And we desperately need people who can be involved in a storyline that's not for the title. We have all kinds of men's feuds going on. We have tag team feuds going on that don't involve the title, that have nothing really to do with the title, and it's fine. And that can translate over to the women. There's no reason. And it doesn't have to be the storylines that another company likes of, you stole my boyfriend or you were wearing the same outfit as me. Women are a little bit more complex than that. There's some people in the world that don't think that, but I'm here to tell you that's wrong. It doesn't always have to be about I feel disrespected or I want the title. Like, there can be a deeper level in women's wrestling. And now that WWE is kind of going back to their diva era where they're cutting the really good talent or they're not featuring the good talent in a way that really shines and speaks to their ability, you have an opening. And I strongly suggest that AEW should take that and work like that. If you're looking for a way to get more buzz, WWE proved that you can get buzz on a women's revolution, and using and utilizing women wrestlers who are good at what they do, not just everybody, who are good at what they do, to improve your show and get more interesting segments and more eyeballs on your product that maybe weren't interested before. So revamping the women's division and how it's booked would be my second bad against AEW. My third, and this has become a new pet peeve for me over the last 6 months or so, is the pivot. In the first year, especially of AEW, they were masters of a pivot. And COVID really, really made them hone that, where when something wasn't working, before the crowds were gone, when something wasn't working and the crowd reacted negatively, it was dropped. It was either dropped cold turkey and like, okay, we're going to just take them off for a while and reset, or it was curved and pivoted around to make the story work with what's going on, that the crowd would react the way you wanted them to. They listened to the audience in the buildings and probably on the internet, and they would pivot often when something didn't work. And in COVID, they had to pivot a lot because those first couple of weeks, they thought everything would be fine. They just push it back a little bit. That didn't happen. He pivoted quickly. He taped a bunch of TV. He rearranged storylines to where it would fit, not necessarily with the original plan, which is great. I think as a wrestling company, as a booker, I think that the pivot is exactly what you like. You have to be a master of it, because sometimes what you think is going to happen is not the reaction that you get from the crowd. i.e., you thought that Sammy and Ty were going to be Mondo baby faces and the world would love them because the world loved Sammy. 6 months ago, the world loved Sammy Guevara. And now he's one of the most hated people on TV. And you just keep pushing it. You yank the title off, you put the title on, you yank the title, and now you've sucked Scorpio Sky into the I don't care realm. And he wasn't beloved before, so it wasn't a long stretch, true, but you you have to pivot. If the plan isn't working, like it clearly was not working the way he wanted it to on the TNT title, just because he wanted to get to that three-way match, it got shoved down our throat. Find another way to get to that match. Reset it some way. My God, dude. So that is my overall, my good and my bad for AEW.
Alrighty. Nick, what say you?
All right, so um, I have been a. I started off as a tentative AEW fan. I was a big WWE guy for most of my life. I followed other companies. I used to watch TNA like in my high school years from like '05 to 2010. I watched Ring of Honor during that time and later, and got into New Japan later. But I never, and I used to argue with Geek about this a lot growing up, that other companies had better matches, and that was pretty much undeniable. But the very best matches and the very best storytelling to me was always from WWE. And I started to feel less like that over the last probably 4 years, a little bit before AEW came around. But, Geek and I, we went to All In, and he was more plugged into that scene than I was. I knew a lot of those guys, and I was a fan of a lot of them, but I wasn't, um, like, I didn't watch Being the Elite. I wasn't, like, I didn't have Bullet Club shirts. Like, you know what I mean? I wasn't, like, that wasn't my main thing. I still was a WWE guy. Um, During the whole NXT switching to Wednesdays to compete with AEW, don't let anyone tell you that's not what they did. That's 100% what they did, and they lost. Um, Ruined what was my favorite wrestling at the time was NXT pretty much immediately whenever they switched to the 2 hour television. They changed the way they were doing things, took away my favorite piece of WWE. And then there was a moment during the pandemic when I was watching Raw and I was just like, I hate this. Like this, and it wasn't because of the pandemic. It was just like, I remember sitting on the couch watching, it was a Viking Raider segment when they were feuding with like Akira Tozawa and there was like a ninja in a dumpster or something. And I was like, this is, really don't like this. And I basically quit watching WWE at that point and became more locked in pretty much solely to AEW because there was no indies running at that time. So I wasn't somebody who was like immediately like, yes, finally wrestling appeals. This is going to be wrestling appeals to me. In fact, I remember watching the first episode of Dynamite and thinking like, well, that was decent. Like I didn't think it was a smash, knock out of the park television show. Um, but I think that they slowly built their feuds, their characters, the matches, really like hooked me in. And there's been some peaks and valleys. When I first moved a couple years ago, in 2020, there was like a period during Moxley's reign when I didn't have cable or Sling or anything, and I was kind of out for, maybe I missed a pay-per-view cycle or two. But I got back into it, and my son got into it, and that really like was fully engaged again. And Yeah, so I wouldn't say that I was somebody who was like going to support AEW no matter what. In fact, I was a little hesitant because I was like, well, we'll see what they can do. But they really did win me over, and it's still my favorite wrestling product going right now by a good margin. I watch it every week. I don't miss pay-per-views. Um, so I am definitely still in a place where I like it. I like it more than I did when it launched still. And I know some people have really dug their heels in and they're AEW or nothing, and then there's some people who have kind of soured on it. But I definitely like it a lot, but I still know that there are things that I don't love. Um, so I'm gonna do a little bit of a different format. I'm gonna go pro con pro con con pro because I want to start and end with pro because that's what I think of the company overall. But the first pro, which is a huge one to me, is the in-ring work, the wrestling matches themselves, and then in turn the quality of the pay-per-views. Um, the best wrestling that you can watch, and you know, I don't watch a lot of New Japan anymore. I catch it here and there, several months after it's passed. But I still think like the kind of wrestling I like, the best goes on in AEW. Um, they have some of the very best wrestlers. They have some of the very best matches. Their matches, they tell good stories in the matches. There's just the moves themselves, and I like a variety of wrestling. I don't and if you listen to the weekly show, I'm not really a big fan of silly stuff, but it has its place. But they put on the kind of wrestling I like. They put on the clinics, the old like Southern style, like bloodbath wrestling, um, the hard hitting like strong style type of stuff. There's going to be almost every week a very good match on either Dynamite or Rampage. Um, so that's a huge positive to me and something that has been missed sorely from television. Really, probably, I don't know if I can ever think of a company that's consistently put on. I know WCW in its real heyday with the cruiserweights was putting on um, bangers pretty much every week, but the Attitude Era, neither company was really focused on the in-ring product. And WWE, I don't think has ever really been an in-ring product company, and that's kind of been the standard bearer for a long time and the only game in town for a while. So it's awesome to just be able to watch like a dang good wrestling match and know I'm going to get at least one every week. Because at the end of the day, like that's really my favorite part of wrestling is the matches and the storytelling is probably they're right there together, but they go hand in hand. So that's my number one positive. The con from that one is they have dipped in their character growth and storytelling. And what I mean by that is there's been stop-start feuds, and I know not all of that's in their control. Injuries, people not being able to come in, but like Hikaru Shida and Serena Deeb took like a year, and they would just kind of throw it back on. Um, Death Triangle and House of Black has been like 6 months, and I know Phoenix was hurt, but that kind of goes back to CJ's point of pivoting. He probably should have just pivoted away from that whenever he got hurt instead of kind of have it on. They basically put House of Black on hold to have that at both teams on hold in order to eventually bring that feud back. And also tying back into my pro, they just had that match at Double or Nothing, their 3 year, and it was an amazing match. Um, but I mean, people like Hangman not being on TV all the time, not seeing a lot of character development out of probably their most um, thoughtful character that they have. The best work they've done as far as building up a character was Hangman, and we kind of saw some of that get lost. And then even though some of it was good, like Danielson um, had his brief, like true bad guy heel run, and then he formed the Blackpool Combat Club. But um, and that's always been a criticism I had from the very start. I remember Cody Rhodes saying like heels and faces are like the past. We don't need that anymore. And that was immediately I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm gonna like this because that was always a critique I had of like Ring of Honor and New Japan back in the day was like the wrestling's really good, but like who am I? Like I don't have a reason to care. And same thing with like going to indie matches. There was no like reason for me to care other than the moves look really good. Um, and then characters flip-flopping, which I kind of touched on. And then another thing, pivoting is part of this. Not changing the bad feuds because a bad feud can really ruin somebody. Sammy's a great example of that. I've been to two Dynamites in Houston, which is Sammy's hometown. The first one, ironically, when he proposed to his girlfriend there, um, he was like a hometown hero. Everybody loved him. He got a huge reaction. People were so excited to see him. This next time, he wasn't even on the show, but in the commercial break, Justin Roberts asked what people thought of Sammy Guevara, and it was about 90% boos from his hometown. So I think that's a perfect example of how that affects character growth and storytelling, and just kind of what if in ring isn't the most important, that's the most important, the storytelling and character growth, and that has really dipped from where they were even a year ago. So I'll go back to my second pro, which is diversity in wrestling. In the wrestling we see, they have um, some old wrestlers, some very old wrestlers, legend, Sting's in there. You've got people who are, still from the Attitude Era. Jeff Hardy's still doing his thing. Dustin Rhodes is in there. CM Punk just won the championship. He's not a young guy, but you also have very, very young people in there. Dante Martin gets TV featured, not all the time, but he's on Hook. Um, Wheeler Yuta, people that they've really put some time to invest in, that are new and young beyond even the AEW originals, people they've signed afterward that were indie guys that have, they put stock in both, because you can't. I think that's what you need. Need a little bit of both. You need the older veterans, but you also need the young guys. The silly and the serious. I think that sometimes they veer too far into the silliness, but it hasn't been as bad recently. The elite has uh, kind of cooled off with their silliness, and the best friends aren't all over the place being silly anymore. But you still have that, but you still have your very serious guys. You have Samoa Joe, you have people like Adam Page, CM Punk, MJF, where they're very serious. You have a difference in the feuds. You have your stopgap feuds, but you have your epic 6-month long feuds. You have your 2-year long storylines that really take their time to play out. And then you have, like, a lot of people didn't like it, but Lance Archer versus Hangman, it was a nice little couple week feud, and the match was good. And I think that they do a good job of varying that. And then the styles, too, of wrestling. We had that Anarchy in the Arena match at Double or Nothing. And I keep bringing that up because if we're talking about a 3-year, this is where they're at right now, was what they did on that pay-per-view. But you had the Anarchy in the Arena match, which was insane. You had the tag team title match, which is my absolute jam of a type of match, just move after move after move, and maybe not the most psychology, but just some crazy in-ring stuff. And then you had the main event, which was a very like classic psychology babyface heel match. So just the diversity of the wrestling, it's not sanitized, it's not all the same, and it keeps you interested, because if the whole 4 hours was Anarchy in the Arena, I would have been bored after the first match. If the whole thing was, you know, Young Bucks, I would have been bored after a couple matches. The whole thing was Punk style matches, I would have been bored after a couple. So I think that's a super important style or of your company, to have a diverse range of styles, and they definitely do that well. Um, the con that goes along with, doesn't really go along with it, but my con is failing to capitalize on momentum, which has been something I have been critical of them since the very start. I think that first match that first show versus Dynamite, in retrospect, was pretty good, but at the time I remember thinking, like, if I didn't want to watch this and I just kind of gave it a shot, I don't know if there's anything that like made me think I absolutely have to watch this next week. And I think after Punk signed, they had a lot of momentum. Anytime they sign new people, Punk's first match back, new people coming in, championship changes, even the Dynamites after pay-per-views, they'll put on like 2 or 3 like classic banger episodes of Dynamite in a row that'll just have like great matches, great storyline progression, awesome promos, top to bottom, like the 2 hours fly by, and then they'll have a big pay-per-view, and then the Wednesday after that will be like a real mediocre Dynamite. And I think that if you miss that first impression and it's just like, oh, that was okay, you've missed your chance to grow the audience. Which, as a fan, I just want to watch. I don't really care about the audience, but I also kind of do, because I've seen a lot of companies come and go. So I think it's important to capitalize on momentum, and I don't think that they always pull it off. And beyond just um, from a financial or business perspective, it just kind of it stalls your momentum as a fan too. If you don't have the buy-in on a feud or the future, then it just isn't as good as it could be, and you just kind of are left waiting. So my final con um, is the presentation and importance of the champions. Um, I think everybody in the world pretty much agrees that the TNT title has been butchered. Um, it was presented so well from Cody in the Open to Brody Lee winning it to Cody winning it back in that awesome match. Darby winning it from Cody, which was a long-term build from the very first. I don't know, it was Fighter Fest or something, or
Second
before they even
show.
had Dynamite. Yeah, the second show ever. They started Cody Darby, and that paid off with Darby winning his first title. Um, and then he was involved with Team Taz and wasn't defending it a lot. But then he really started defending it a lot and putting on great matches after that feud was over. And then he lost it to Miro, who had just like a killer reign. And then Sammy kind of won it. And I was like, I don't know if this is going to work. But it eventually did because he was very hot at the time and it was, proved to be a good thing. And then it starts to get messy, with Cody and Sammy and the interim belt. And, ever since then, ever since Sammy won it back from Cody, it's really been a shit show. Um, but beyond that, even um, the women's title, Britt Baker's reign did start to kind of feel stale toward the end, and I feel like when Thunder Rosa won it, it wasn't the time. She needed to be the one to do it, but the matches didn't really deliver, and it just didn't. It didn't wasn't as hot as it was at a certain point for them to have done that switch. Um, the tag team champions they've been recouping the tag division in the last month and a half, 2 months. But I remember at like the start of the new year, they had all the tag teams kind of come out and look at Jurassic Express. But at that point, like that reign really started to go down with the Lucha Brothers having it. And I don't know, there just weren't any good feuds to buy in on that one. And Hangman, he just lost the belt to Punk, but his reign has been the matches have been great, but the feuds have not really, and the character development hasn't made a ton of sense to me. And he's not been on TV a lot, and their champions just aren't on TV enough to make you really feel like they're important, and their feuds aren't given enough time to really make you feel like they're important. So I think that every belt, with the exception of the TBS championship held by Jade, who I was thought about listing as a pro, was the way they've elevated some very, very fresh people like Wardlow and Jade. But um, Jade is basically their most credible champion right now. It could be you could make the argument now that it's Punk, but he's just won it, so we can't really say that. But um, the championships don't really feel important, and for a long time in AEW they were, and that kind of set them apart from what we'd seen on TV for years. So I hope that they can go back to that. And I think, like I said, they've been recouping the women's to an extent and the tag team division. The TNT title is going to take some serious rehabbing, and we'll see what happens to the world title. But that's been something over the last 6, 7, 8, 9 months, maybe even, has been glaring to me. Um, but the number one pro, I think, for AEW is I have written big meaty feuds, which you can just go ahead and read that in the voice of the fish that says big meaty claws in that episode of SpongeBob. But um, even when the character work is slipping and the feuds are slipping and people are off TV and they're on TV and they don't capitalize on momentum, there's always a couple killer feuds that really have my interest and that are done very, very well. I think they happen to have lately been involved. CM Punk has been involved with a lot of them, because like him or not, like the decision to put the title on him or not, he has insane levels of charisma. He can talk, he can wrestle, he knows how to make a feud seem important. MJF has also been a big part of those feuds. Um, so I think that that's the thing going back that I always stuck with me about WWE was like maybe 80% of the show was crappy, but you still had CM Punk or Shawn Michaels Undertaker at WrestleMania 25 or 26. You always had um, CM Punk Undertaker later. Like even on shows that weren't very good, you always at least had one feud. Bryan Danielson was doing something. They were doing something good with somebody that I felt like was above what everybody else was doing. I don't feel like that anymore with WWE specifically. I think that that's one of the reasons I quit paying attention to it is because they didn't have that anymore. There was not anybody left that I was like, oh yeah, they're doing this guy's at least like I'm interested in this. And I'm not saying like Roman, they're doing very good with Roman, but I'm not necessarily interested in his feuds. I just like him as a character. But AEW always has at least a feud going that's awesome. They might have some thrown together ones alongside it, but I think that as long as you have a through line of one, and it's usually one or two or three really good feuds going on, you're gonna keep me hooked personally, and I think you'll keep a majority of people on your side. So you'll never decrease too much as long as you have that. You need to do other things to build, but I think that's their biggest pro.
Okay. So I guess it's just kind of left for me right now. And when I first heard about AEW, I watched that episode being the elite. At the time, I was really big into the internet being the elite's sort of bubble. And I remember when they announced it, I was excited because we kind of the number one fear that a lot of us had at that time, and we thought they were all going to go to WWE, and that would have been cool and all, but um, just I didn't want the elite to go to WWE. We always had the fear of they're going to be misused, this, that, and the other. So I was a little relieved at first to hear about AEW, and then when I found out that because of AEW that they weren't gonna be really working with New Japan anymore, or Ring of Honor, and I remember kind of really being disappointed about that because part of the reason I made the decision to do WrestleMania weekend in New York was a lot of us that went to All In were all like, "Hey, after that show, we think that the Madison Square Garden show is probably going to be like the next All In." And when there was no real involvement from any of the elite, um, that hurt, and it hurt the show. And it really took a lot of the buzz and the excitement I was feeling about that show, made it from like the thing I was looking forward to the most that weekend to maybe the worst show I went to that weekend. So I know that, but there was some concern about AEW and what is this company going to be? Is it going to be being the elite, the wrestling show? And when it first started, the thing I liked, I really just I loved everything they were doing. I mean, yeah, they had their misses, but like I loved everything they were doing. Um, especially in the early day with like Cody and MJF. Uh, you know, the whole Hangman saga from being disenfranchised with the elite to wanting to leave to having this tag team with Kenny to listening, everything with Hangman Page was great. The TNT title, even during the pandemic, as much as 2020 sucked, like AEW was banger after banger after banger, and they made, even in a unnormal world, they kept good wrestling going to where it felt normal watching those wrestling shows. Um, so that made me very passionate about AEW lately. And I'll get into this more when we get into my pros and cons, but I don't feel the same passion. I feel like through their growth, some things have changed, and I understand that that's a part of a growing business, so I'm not angry about that. As I'm actually very happy that as Easy alluded to, they're running the United Center, they're running. He's more the sports guy than me, but they're running bigger arenas, and that's something good, and that's something good for the business, and it's something that's gonna keep it so we have an AEW around, which is great. But on the other hand, part of me misses that grassroots feeling, that all in feeling, even all out that I got to go to. This buzz of a feeling. Um, with it's big but not too big. It's not bigger than itself. You there's 10,000 people in the arena, but you still feel connected. And you know, um, I guess that had to go away at some point. But that's one of the things I loved about AEW. And unfortunately now, like I think they've moved past that, which kind of sucks. But it's still my favorite wrestling show to watch. Maybe not lapping the field, as it were, through 2019, 2020, and 2021. But definitely, it's still number one, and it's going to take either a great amount of falling off for AEW for it to not be number one, or another company to like really be home run after home run to make that number one. Um, as far as my pros, my first one is kind of one that Nick alluded to is great matches. There are great matches. Now, when I get into my cons, you're gonna think I'm contradicting myself, but like I enjoy the wrestling matches. I think that is I do come to wrestling for wrestling, and I enjoy good wrestling matches. So I'm going to get a better wrestling match on television watching Dynamite compared to Raw or SmackDown. So that's just pro number one. Pro number two is, and I hope this isn't something that goes away, I feel like anybody, and maybe it's not like as certain as I was last year at this time, but anybody who's popular enough can be the champion. Hangman Page caught on, and he was, without question, probably the most least popular elite member at All In. But through just good storytelling, good wrestling, good build, they they made him the centerpiece of AEW. You could conceivably believe that Jungle Boy, MJF, Darby Allin, Sammy, even for a time, Orange Cassidy, and now like Eddie Kingston. Did you ever in your lifetime, especially those of us watching independent wrestling, think that Eddie Kingston would be able to have a shot and maybe potentially be world champion in a mainstream company? I know I sure didn't. But now, because of AEW and how well they've done things and how well they've presented Eddie Kingston could conceivably, and it's not too far off base to think this way, could become a world champion on a television, for a wrestling promotion with primetime television and on, cable TV. Not just on syndication or, anything like that, like actually cable TV in primetime. So, like, that's cool. And my third pro, and this is something they've also gotten away from a little bit, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in the cons. There's something in it for everyone. Nick and I have a friend who we don't believe he's quite sold on AEW. Doesn't watch it a whole lot, and he's an old school wrestling guy, and he sees certain things. He sees the spot stuff. He sees the Young Bucks and the Lucha Bros and certain things like that he's not into and he doesn't get. And that's just AEW. It's like, that's just one part of the show. Granted, he's not there anymore, but like, you could point to, like, you got Cody Rhodes doing like some Jim Crockett Promotions type stuff that's damn good. You have, Kenny Omega doing some, New Japan level stuff. You got Moxley doing like the old Memphis sort of stuff. And there's something on that show for every type of wrestling fan. At least maybe not as much now, but firmly in, the past with this company, and it's not out of the woods yet. Um, as far as my cons, and I think the one big one is one that Nick alluded to, which is they've really lost it on their storytelling and their characters. I think they really and truly have. As much as I love a 5-star wrestling match, I like a 5-star wrestling match even more with great build, great character work, and I just care. You know, um, an example of this is uh, during the pandemic era. Dave Meltzer rated a Young Bucks versus Pac and Phoenix tag match is 5 stars, and everybody was really excited about that match. But I didn't like it. I didn't care. I didn't care about that match. I didn't think it was built well. And then compare that to Thunder Rosa and Britt Baker, which had like an amazing storyline and you know such a great build that's why I love that match so much, and that's why I cared. And they've fallen. I'm afraid that they've, as a company, gotten so caught up in the section of the audience that's just like great wrestling, 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 5 stars, 5 stars, 5 stars, Dave Meltzer, 5 stars, 5 stars, 1 hour, go, go. That I'm so afraid that they've lost sight of like what good storytelling and what good characterization does to improve their product. When NXT was really popular, and they were in the golden years, and I'm pretty sure Nick would agree with me on this one, with how great they were, I know, like, the big criticism, if, like, you said you enjoyed NXT TakeOver more than a New Japan show, and then eventually AEW was, well, NXT is just putting out a bunch of matches, which is fine. They're good matches, but there's no reason to care. It's just they don't know how to create characters and stories and make you really care outside of the top main event. And that's what makes New Japan and then later on AEW superior to NXT. And I couldn't really argue that point. And I have seen AEW kind of go down what was the big criticism of NXT, going down that road where it's just like, okay, there's no build, but the match, yo. And that rubs me the wrong way. I don't like that because it used to be kind of the ultimate of great wrestling and great storytelling, but now they've let the storytelling slack, and they it seems like they're just kind of content to go, yeah, but the match was great. What are you complaining about? I really don't like that. The other thing that I'm not liking about the company is also alluded to this. You gotta make the champions feel like champions. I respect the hell out of the fact that they want to make it seem like everybody's important to this show, and it's not just about the world champ. And when you compare that to competition, where they make it seem like outside of the world champion, nothing else matters. It is refreshing for AEW to say, hey, we're all a team here and we all make this, great. But at the same time, if you want the championship to mean something, you got to make it seem like the champions are important. You have to do that. And it's not impossible. Lots of other companies knew how to make their champions look important, but at the same time still go, look, here's other things you should care about. In the year 2000, it was, pretty well the whole year it was Rock and Triple H for the title, and you knew those were the guys, and you knew that, The Rock was the man, in the summer, but you cared about Chris Jericho and what he was doing with, be it with against Triple H or against DX or against Chris Benoit or whatever. You cared about Kurt Angle going through the King of the Ring or Rikishi, and you you cared about the Hardy Boys and all this difference. You knew where the top was, but you also still cared about everyone else. And that's not, from the outside looking in, I'm not in Tony Khan's shoes. That's not difficult, and it shouldn't be difficult. But lately, it just seems like they don't know what to do. It's like, well, if we give too much time to Hangman Page, we everybody else will look like they're not very good. That won't do. It's like, no, you just got to reiterate that Hangman's the man, or now CM Punk's the man, or that whoever. Um, so that's my other con is like, you gotta, make your champions feel like champions. They're not just other guys with trinkets around their waist. These are the best. These are the best your company has to offer, and they should be treated as such. Everybody's kind of like, I have the women's division is a con, but like that's been, everybody said their piece on that, so it's like nothing I say is going to mean anything. So my other con of the company is find out what you want to be now. I don't think AEW knows what they want to be. They want to still act like they're the grassroots little engine that could alternative, and being the alternative is great, but you can't come across like this, like we were built up by the fans mentality and charge $150 a pop for a meet and greet at your pay-per-view weekend. Like, you can't have that earnestness and then charge all those people that kind of money. You can't go like, look at what we've built and then go off the deep end when fans have, criticism of your product. You can't. It's hard to put into words, but it's like, the growth is great and I support the growth, but it's like, you either gotta like we fans know, like, okay, your company's grown, we gotta do this, so just act like you've grown. You have. Don't make us think that this is still the ground level blue collar revolution, because it's not anymore. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, but it's no longer fighting the system. It is the system. You've signed a bunch of WWE guys, which is great. You got to sign the best. But, you have Mark Henry and Paul White to big contracts. You've signed Christian to a big contract. You've signed CM Punk and Bryan Danielson to a big contract. This is no longer the one where, like, we're going to take these independent guys and make them stars. You still do that, but it's a lot bigger than that now, so don't act like that's what you still are, if that makes sense. You just can't. Eventually you're not the mom and pop's deli anymore. Eventually you're Subway. And it's okay to keep certain aspects about your recipe going that made it when you were a mom and pop's deli, like the place everybody wanted to eat and why you were able to expand. But eventually you just can't present yourself that way. Like, even and if you try to do it that way, it comes across very fake. And I feel like AEW's kind of been doing that lately. It's, I don't know. It's hard to kind of put that sort of feeling into words, but that's kind of how I'm feeling about the company right now. But overall, it's still a company that I enjoy the most. So now that we've gotten that all out of the way, to close out this State of the Union sort of address for AEW, we're going to go around the horn one more time, and we're going to let each of the individual marks give a letter grade to how they feel the company is doing business-wise and how they're doing creatively. And we're going to start with Easy again. Easy, letter grades to business and creative, and why?
All right, so for business wise, I would give it maybe an A minus because I know that you did touch up that for a company that's trying to say we're fighting the system. You actually kind of have become the system a little in a way, but you're still showcasing the greatness of what you established. But there are some things that need to work on. They're trying to be. You're not really trying to be. Actually, no. In a way, you're trying to be the kid that's getting like all the straight A's and everything. You want to be like the valedictorian. Well, here's the news flash: nobody's gonna give a fuck. But frankly, just you have something awesome that you're creating. It just needs some touch-ups here and there, and obviously, no company is ever going to be perfect in a way. And AEW, will admit the fault, so it's okay, not to be perfect. But for a company, you want to embrace on being the best pro wrestling company ever, there are some tweaks you need to go with here. So, and also, it would also help with the Canadian show, but that's one thing. Anyways, creatively, it's a much lower grade. It's a B minus. So yeah, I kind of go with the minus thing here, but I'm just being dead honest here. There are creative stuff that needs extreme work on, and a lot of us touched up on that, and especially with CJ pointing out the pivot moments, which my first thought was the Friends gag. But anyways, uh, there comes a point where it's like, if this is not going to work, just scrap it. Like, completely. We acknowledge that it happened. We tried. The fans didn't like it. You don't need to kind of, like, keep saying, like, oh, let's just keep pushing this. Like, no. The whole thing with the rivalry they have with American Top Team, Sammy Guevara and Ty Conti, like, it isn't so much that I don't like either of them. It's you've tried forcing this so many times that I'm actually kind of tired of it. I just don't care about Top Team. So I don't really care about Sammy and Ty being a super couple. Like, what? Are you trying to create Cody Brandy 2.0 here? Just. Oh. So, actually, well, Ty Conti is Brazilian, but so that's beside the point. So, just there's some things you need to work on, and especially for AEW to promote the whole creative freedom that the superstars go for here. Okay, then let them do what they can. We don't really need script writers, saying, "Hey, this is how it's going to work," because no, you're going to revert back to having the worst job in the whole world, and that is being a creative writer for WWE. But anyways, just a lot to work on. So hopefully, with the world, hopefully by next year, normalcy or whatever. I'm tired right now. But anyways, this normalcy of us not having to worry about illnesses and all that. It's going to be a huge improvement. And once again, we'll finally get an AEW show in Canada. Anyways, that's all I can say.
All right.
And also, Tony
CJ.
Khan owes me $100 since Cody's gone. That's
CJ,
another
letter
story.
grades to the business and the creativity.
Easy. I don't think those contracts transferred. Um, for my business grade, obviously I'm the one that's pretty hypercritical of Tony Khan and AEW for business practices. For my letter grade for business, I give them a C plus. You're passing, bro, but you need some improvement. You're gonna pay my dad $10. That was the sliding scale growing up. For me, you can't be using Twitter to gauge every single thing, including like your light bill and everything else. You can't go on Twitter and bash other companies. You're not Wendy's. It doesn't play well. Um, I have a feeling that the money issue in AEW is a lot more than people want to say. I understand that TK is allegedly worth billions, millions. That's not liquid funds, and that's not an AEW. That's his. I think personally that they're going to start having some money troubles, and that's why we're seeing hundreds of dollars for someone that I can go to an indie promotion and pay $30 to meet and greet. And it's a lot more enjoyable of experience from my point of view and my experiences. So you got some work to do on the business end. For creative, I'm going a solid B, 85%. There's still some work that I think could improve the product, um, but it's enjoyable. It's a totally respectable creative product. We kind of touched on it. There's a little bit of something for everyone. With that, you're never going to get a perfect score, so a B there.
Okay, Nick.
All right, so financials, I don't pay a ton of attention to that, and we also don't really know. It's kind of all based on rumor and what we can feeling vibe we get from what's going on. Um, but I think I would probably say like a B minus. Um, and it seems just because it makes sense to me with the amount of people they have signed, if they're paying them well, which I assume they are, probably not necessarily comparable to what they could make in WWE, but um, I think some of the people they signed wouldn't sign for peanuts. Um, and just how big their roster is, that has to be a ton of money coming out. Um, I still give them points because there's a lot of talk, and this is really the main metric we have is ratings that we kind of seem to understand a little bit as fans. Um, and the ratings, despite all the hubbub, are still good. They're better than anyone expected. They're better than they should be because it's a bad product, but they're better than really like anyone would think that they would be at this point. Um, I think um, Rampage and Battle of the Belts. Battle of the Belts has been a failure, and that's partially creative, but it doesn't seem to be really generating hype or ton of viewership, so I don't think that's good for their brand. Rampage at one point was the best show on television. It was an hour of good wrestling, good promos, feuds moving forward. Super. It felt like 10 minutes when you watched Rampage. It flew by. That hype has just kind of gone down. It is the B show now, with for a fact. And it wasn't like that to start. So I think that's kind of been not great. But at the end of the day, their ratings are still good, and the demo does matter. Don't let anyone tell you it doesn't. I was a weird, nerdy kid who was obsessed with that kind of stuff. I had an Entertainment Weekly subscription growing up and in like middle school, and the ratings for forever have been based on the demo. That is what people care about, and the demo numbers are good for them. Um, and their pay-per-view buys are the best any company has had outside of WWE since WCW. Um, So I think if you look at ratings and pay-per-view numbers, um, financially they're still good, which is why I would say probably in that B range. Um, Creatively, this is a tough one. I want to say probably a B plus as it sits right now. Um, Real close to an A minus. Um, I think, like I said, my main pro was the big meaty feuds, and that's the core of it. Every week, the MJF Punk stuff was, to me, great week to week. You knew you were going to get a good segment. The MJF Wardlow stuff has been really good. Um, the build was weird for Punk Hangman, but it was performed well by everybody. Um, and I kind of have some theories as to why I went on like a mini rant about Hangman suddenly being angry and a jerk about CM Punk, but I think I kind of um, that's gonna make sense in the long run. I think, which if that's the case, then kudos. You're smarter than I was when you were booking that. But like I said, and they're rebounding some of the championships that have been misused. Um, I think, like I said, everyone but the TNT Championship is in a state of recouping right now. Um, and you still have good feuds going on here and there. So overall, the storytelling has dipped. There was a point when I would say it was a solid A in AEW, like they were firing on all cylinders. Um, but I think they're still killing it with the in-ring storytelling, like the John Moxley, or not the Moxley, the Eddie Kingston with the gas, that whole callback to different things that weaves so many feuds in and out of that feud. The way Hangman lost his championship and building up his character. Like I feel like if they can capitalize on this momentum of Double or Nothing, we could be in for a real good spring here again, or a good summer of creative from AEW. So I um I would put it that B plus A minus is higher than it was probably 3 weeks ago. It probably would have been closer to a B minus, but I feel like we're back on the upswing again.
Okay. So for me, as far as business, I'm the business person here said C plus, so I feel like I'm obligated to also go C plus. I was gonna go C, but if the person who smarted business wants to give it more credit, I'll follow that lead. Um, we don't know the financials, and yes, the demo is doing well, but eventually stuff comes to bite you in the ass, and all with all of us going off of is rumor and innuendo and dirt sheet reports and just the small amount we know about financials. you know this isn't the debate for the day, and it could be completely off base, but when one of your top guys is potentially walking out because he feels like he's not getting paid enough, and there's speculation that there are people that have not done a tenth of what they do for the company, um, that's making significantly, like super duper significantly more than that person, you gotta, something's not right business wise, and something's not right with how you're running your business. Now, that's, again, this is all rumor and innuendo. It could be completely not true, and all this could just be bullshit, but I'm only privy to rumor and innuendo and dirt sheet reporting about money like everyone else is, so from how I interpret that, you know, again, you're not Paul Heyman in the year 2000 2001, where you're dying and hoping that there's enough T-shirt money to be able to run another town. But on the flip side, you're there's rumors that you're not that they're not paying people what they're worth, but they're still going out and buying new promotions and signing new guys and signing people that have name recognition that are gonna command and demand, and rightfully so, a good dollar amount. So I'll say C plus to go around with the person smarter than me on the subject, but I don't. Eventually, it feels like an inflated bubble, and it feels like it's gonna burst. Um, as far as creative, I'm gonna go B minus, and I know some people are gonna say that's low. There is, even though like I don't care for CM Punk, like that is something in the to most people, and objectively that is something that they can really get some momentum off of. But at the same time, like, and if we would have been doing this in January or February, like I'd probably give creative an A minus, maybe even an A. But I feel like they just let so many things slip through their fingertips. You know, uh, the tag division's gone down. The just in how that's presented, and tag belts have gone down. Thunder Rosa, things gonna really bring it, and like, okay, she had a great match at the pay per view, but it was just so they didn't put enough into it. The world champion, with Hangman, this should have been the greatest reign ever, but really it was just kind of down. And like, there's still good things, which is why it hasn't fallen to C or D or F territories yet. Like there's still more good than bad, but you've squandered it. We were once the World Series favorite, and now we're kind of maybe going to win the division, and we might have to hope for the wild card. Like that's where we're at, and there's still some season left for us to turn it around, but you can't dilly dally. You can't let too much more stuff get away from you, or else I feel it will get worse. And there were, like I kind of said with my pros and cons, there's a lot of things that we as a fan base, knew without a shadow of a doubt that we did with this company, with our company AEW, that we were all, supporting from the ground up, that like we knew we did this better than everyone, and now we can't say some of those things. But it's not too late for you to be able to, fix those things up and bring it back up. And hopefully that will change. But we will see. And that is it for this week's episode. I want to thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed, please give it a like, share, subscribe for more content, and be sure to check out our live streams every Thursday. But thanks for listening. See you next time.